with at the end, or maybe you're jotting notes down, you miss something, by all means, you'll be able to watch it later. If you do have any questions, we do encourage you to use the question and answer box at the bottom. So that way your questions can hopefully be answered during this panel discussion. We do still encourage you to use the chat for engagement with each other and things like that as well. But if you have questions that pertain to the panel, by all means, please use that. Also, the panelists at the end of this will have their information shared in the chat feature. So that way, if you have any questions related to some topics you heard, you will be able to hear those or reach out to them directly. So thank you for being here, and we look forward to learning together what these great panelists have to say. So let's go ahead and introduce some of our friends here. So hopefully, there we go. We're getting some panelists popping up here. And if we want to make sure the panelists, go ahead and unmute yourselves, and that way we are ready to go. And if we want to go ahead and start, since I see Shelby on my computer screen, Shelby, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the group here?
Hello, everybody. My name is Shelby Nichter. I work at YMCA Camp Potawatomi in Northeast Indiana, and I'm our summer camp program director.
Annalise?
Hi, I'm Annalise Steele. I was a counselor last summer at YMCA Camp Classen in Southern Oklahoma.
Bailey?
I am Bailey Lorton, and I was a camp counselor at Lake County YMCA Day Camp in Cleveland, Ohio.
Jenna?
I am Jenna Johnson. I'm the director of camping at YMCA Camp Greenville in South Carolina. And we actually do have snow on the ground, so nothing compared to the Midwesterners, but excited to be coming to you guys from the Southeast here.
Madeline?
Hi, I'm Madeline Lombardo. I am the Director of Camping Services at Camp Pendaluan, but I've been doing that for about 36 hours. So I am going to be talking about my experience as the Senior Program Director at YMCA Store Camps.
Awesome. And Becky?
Hello, everybody. I'm Becky Spencer, Vice President of Camping with YMCA Store Camps.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. You know, we did our best to pull you guys together from all areas of camping world, and we appreciate you being here. What we're doing here, and maybe I mentioned it before, but we're trying to learn from the experts that ran camp last year so that we can learn and adapt and grow together in the camping world based on their experiences and learn from them. So we've got some topics that we received from some people that they want to hear about, and some questions that what they want answered. So we're going to jump right in for the sake of time. And the first topic we're going to go ahead and discuss is communication and messaging within your camp leading up to and during. If Becky, if you wouldn't mind jumping in, I'd appreciate it, and kind of letting us know what you did there.
Sure. Well, it was quite a spring last year and summer, and it continues to be challenging. And communications is key, not only with campers, staff, and alumni and donors. So it's a broad spectrum of people that need to be in the loop of what's happening at camp. What we did is we had internal communications. We were actually Zooming with the staff that were working because we wanted to stay mitigated and distanced. And then we put together plans that were very strategic in moving forward. So some of our communications were just engagement videos that were educational or fun or calming to stay connected through social media. Another communication mode was just using Google Docs to get all our documents and procedures put together. When we started getting the staff hired, there was an app called Icebreaker that is like speed dating, and it was just a fun way to get the staff to get to know each other a little bit. You'd be chatting, there'd be like prescribed questions, and then you'd chat individually with somebody for a couple minutes, and then there'd be another question and you would get flipped to a different person to speak with Icebreaker. And then communication during summer camp with the staff was a WhatsApp. And it could be a group, a whole group, it could be a small group of like the leadership team. And I will tell you that one of the downfalls of it was a great way to communicate to a mass number of people. But when staff started to use it like we need the toilet fixed in Searles Lodge, then that wasn't the appropriate use for it. So managing it the way that it was meant to be managed. For our camper families, we use Zoom meetings, and that went really well. And we communicated things like how our program is different, what to pack differently, what our masking procedures were going to be. The schedule was very different, how our food service was going to go. We really took care of the basic needs were when those communications, the Zoom meetings started with the different age groups, was looking at the fundamental needs of kids. And, that's housing and that's food, and then it's programming. And of course, the parents about their safety.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing, Becky. Jenna, how about you? Did you have something to add to that?
Sure. I think a lot of those same logistics for us, we, just increased our engagement. So we did a lot of, virtual camp at home type meetups with our camp families, especially during the time where we just didn't have an answer for them, whether or not we were going to run camp, just trying to keep them engaged and hopeful, keep us engaged and hopeful. And then the same with our staff. And so, the same thing as Becky said, as far as just emails, we completely revamped our, frequently asked questions on our website, just to be more, easy to find those answers, and Zoom calls. And then just for us overall, philosophically as well, we were just super transparent and honest with, what we, with our parents and with our staff, of what we're going to be able to control and what we're not going to be able to control. And, just really being honest that we cannot promise you a COVID-free summer. Like, this is, a risk that you're taking to send your camper here, and here are all the things that we are doing, but then also being really open and transparent just about, we respect the decision that you have to make. So whether you're going to come to camp or whether you're not going to come to camp, we're going to respect that either way, and work with you, and just really trying to maintain those retention pieces as well. So all the families that did end up canceling for the summer, of just really making sure our communication with them was really strong as well. And it was incredible to see how many people really felt bad. And so working with them to be like, we're still here for you. Like, you are still part of our camp family. We will reach back out to you in the fall. And I had some staff back out too who were not comfortable working. And so just overall, philosophically, to just really making sure to be really careful about how were we communicating what we were going to do, but then also if somebody didn't feel comfortable with that, managing on that end as well.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists have any comments on communication, either how you were communicated with, or maybe the platforms you were communicated through, or anything like that? No. Okay. What do you guys think anybody can jump in, maybe Becky or Jenna, since you answered, what was the most successful method of communication for you?
I think for the parent confidence, it was the Zoom meetings, where they got to see some of our staff and hear what was going to be happening. And also staying connected with them throughout the spring. So they knew that we were working to get things ready for summer, and that, and I'm talking through the social media things that Madeline did, many of them for us.
Yeah, agreed. I think just that constant, and our Zoom meetings, we sent out our policies to our parents so they could read through them. We put them on our website. We had a Zoom meeting where it was just like, ask us anything, like talk to the directors. What are you worried about? What do you have questions about? So I think just keeping the lines open, and whatever seemed to work for each group.
We'll move into enrollment and registration. I know, Jenna, you maybe even mentioned some of this too about how we're handling registration, but If we could talk about maybe like what changes you made to your registration process to make it safer or more manageable for families, or not knowing even, Jenna mentioned whether we would or not, and what our capacity limitations might be. How did you handle the registration side of things? Deposits, payment methods, refunds, things like that. And Shelby, if you don't mind, I'll have you jump in and maybe start on your end of kind of what that looked like.
Sure. So we didn't make any major changes to our registration process. For enrollment, we did limit the amount of campers we were taking per cabin for each cabin. So instead of 12 campers per cabin, we were only taking 8. So that's the only operationally registration side. We did provide full refunds for families, and we communicated that. That's probably the number one question that we heard over and over again was, will there be any refunds? And so we had decided, due to COVID, we were going to refund families whether they decided they wanted to keep their spot and decide closer to camp, or if they decided early on. And so we asked them to communicate with us at least a week or two beforehand, because we did have wait lists, and so we could get some other campers in there. But that was the only major change, was providing those refunds, and we were happy to do that, knowing that each family had to make that decision for themselves.
Becky, if you don't mind kind of speaking about what STORE may have done.
Sure. We went to half capacity for our cabins. We offered several options if people had to cancel, and that was a full refund, an account credit for next year, or a donation to our camp. And most of the people went with account credits. I think one of the things, if you operated last summer, you learned that your enrollment's going to switch up even the night before, because you'll get a phone call at 1 o'clock in the morning from a parent that's very upset the night before check-in, and they're going to say, we just found out my daughter was exposed and she can't come to camp. And they're distraught, first of all, because they're missing the experience. So you have to expect this ever evolving adjustment. And you can't make decisions in a pandemic about switching kids in cabins once they're all checked in, because you want your cabin to be a pod group and a cabin group together. And if you find out that you made a mistake and put 2 people named Liz in one cabin, and one of them was supposed to go to a different one, mistake when they're walking out to their cabins, you can't switch that. You got to stick with it because of the potential of exposure. So the flexibility isn't there to change things up at the last minute once you have everybody set into their cabins. I'll say one of the things we did differently this year, so we kept a Google Doc going, and for the refunds with all the notes, so any one of our staff could go in and just check the ongoing of what was happening. We started out in June with about 620 campers registered, and we actually only ended up being able to serve about 357. So about half of our families backed out, even though our state allowed us to open up. And I think it'll be different this year. I think families moving into it are going to realize that things are going to be, we know more of what's going on. We know how to mitigate the problems, and there'll be more confidence this summer moving ahead. I don't expect 50% dropout rates from summer camp. And then finally, one of the things we did different to keep our horseback riding, so we could keep it as a program, we used to have children sign up to go horseback riding or sign up to go to lessons. And we decided to stop all the signups, and each cabin group would go get a trail ride this summer, and we didn't charge anything extra for it. And it actually helped us with an equity issue then too, because children that were worried that they couldn't afford a horse ride, even though we would scholarship it, but they didn't really know that or understand that. Every child got a ride on horses this summer. And that was a big change in how we operated rather than collecting fees for that. Kept our kids safe, and it got everybody on horses.
There's a question that came through on the question and answer from Alex that says, how did you decide on specific cabin capacity reduction So for example, I know Shelby, you mentioned you moved down to 8 campers or even by half. And where did those numbers come from? Who made those decisions? How were those decisions made? Things like that, if anybody can take.
We just listened from the Y cabinet recommendations with the field guide, with our state, with our health department, and that's what people were pretty much agreeing on last summer. We're going to go half plus one in 2021, half capacity plus one.
We had decided to keep cabin groups in groups of 10. So that was the 8 campers and 2 staff members, just making that nice even number of 10.
Did anybody have to deal with local state government mandates in regards to square footage or things like that? And if you did, would you mind kind of elaborating? I know that was a question that came through as well. And thanks for that question, Ricky.
We just kept our health department close at hand, and they agreed with everything that we did. There wasn't a real specific mandate.
Agreed with, especially being in South Carolina, we had some looser policies, I would say, coming from our state than most. And so we chose to go, I mean, the same with Becky, we chose to go off of, the Y cabinet, the American Camping Association, and just err on the side of, the lower number possible, basically. So really, we went over what we would have had to do with our state guidelines.
And I know Becky. Oh, go ahead. Whoever.
Well, I was just going to say, looking at financial models is really important because it's really hard to run camp on half capacity, and we all need to get this pandemic over and get back to full cabins for long-term financial health.
And I know you answered this already a little bit, Becky, in your answer, but it came through the chat. And just a reminder to anybody that may be throwing questions in the chat, put those in the question and answer box so we can see those. I just happened to see this one come through asking about capacity or registration really for 2021. And has decisions been made at your camp already? And I know, Becky, you said half plus one. Is anybody else already planning on reduced? And if so, maybe are they looking at the same as last year or a change from last year?
We are, so for us, we are not reducing our cabins. We are registering at full capacity. However, we are, now that we have a whole year instead of a month, we are changing our cabins internally. So the bed spacing, the barriers that we're putting into the beds, the storage. So we're doing some amendments to the layout of the cabin, and then how they'll actually be sleeping in, the sleeping arrangement. So.
We're going to go ahead and move in, and I know this will be a big one for policies and procedures. Adaptation into our camp for policies and procedures, and honestly, we could be looking at anywhere from what Becky did with horseback riding to cabin groups and pods and things like that. But Madeline, if you don't mind jumping in to start this one out, like what did you do to adapt with COVID for that? And I know specifically there's even a question in the chat about dining and food service. So if that's something you can talk about too.
Sure, absolutely. So for when it comes to policies and procedures, we really operated at STORE as each cabin was their own individual group. And so they were together and traveled together for every activity, for every meals, things like that. Now, dining services in particular, we transitioned from family style to served buffet. And then we ran split meals, or what we called split meals. So we ran 2 breakfasts, 2 lunches, and 2 dinners, so that even our dining hall was never overfull, and there was space between each table, and the kids would go up and we would dismiss the cabins individually up to the line, and they would stay on. They're 6 feet apart in the line with the dining services. No salad bar or anything like that. Just they were getting things served much like a cafeteria in through that way. And then we put an emphasis on eating outdoors whenever possible. So if a group wanted to eat outdoors, they could, and we could figure out how to make that work for them. Same with our groups. Now, we would sometimes have our two cabins be together at an activity, but we would just make sure that those cabins were spaced from each other. And if they were interacting with each other, they were masked. And that was always very clear with our parents, as well as when we were going to ask the kids to be masked and when we weren't going to say that it was okay if they were not masked. If a kid ever wanted to stay masked whenever they wanted to, they were more than welcome to do that. So.
And Jenna, if you don't mind tackling some of these too, and I know there's probably big questions around check-in, check-out, screening and things like that, and how you adapted to make sure everybody was safe in your camps, if you don't mind.
Yeah, definitely. So we completely changed our check-in and check-out procedure. So we called it cabin side drop-off, essentially. And so we rerouted our entire camp property. So they checked in with a person on the road. So our staff were taking roll like the main roster as they were even entering into camp. And then they were driving through our different cabin areas, pulling up near that cabin area. We did allow the parents to get out of the car to help get luggage out and things like that. However, they couldn't go further than 2 feet from the vehicle. So they were not allowed in the cabins. And then all of our staff, we did our check-in, our health checks and health screens right there at the car. So the camper was getting their health screen, their temperature check, their COVID questionnaire, their lice check, all of that stuff right there. And then we also had a mobile site, drop-off site for our medication as well. So the nurses would have, be able to still talk to the parents, and it wasn't relying on our staff to hand over that medication. And then they exited camp. So it was basically a one-way track through our camp property. And surprisingly, we had a lot of great feedback, especially our returning parents were so excited with how quick check-in went. I think what we would have to adapt for this year is how to give some of our new families more time, if possible, with the cabin leader, just to give some of that reassurance. And everybody understood last year, but I think moving into this summer, that's something we really need to look at. And then checkout was done the exact same way. So the kids had all of their luggage ready to go. And then we, when the parent pulled up to the cabin area, we then called the camper over from the cabin and they got in the car and then left. So we did get rid of, we would traditionally have a parent program on Saturdays. So we did get rid of that. We also did not allow parents to go into our camp store. So that did force us to move to a online camp store platform, which is actually something we've been wanting to do for a long time. So that was a good motivator to get that done, and then really just push that with them on checkout day of, if you want to get camp swag, go. So those are probably the biggest adjustments to the bookends of the camp week.
And then just to kind of follow up with that, because just to clarify, Jenna, resident camp, correct?
Yes.
That's what you're speaking to. And
yes.
Maybe Madeline, and I believe Bailey, you're from a day camp as well. Maybe Madeline and Bailey can testify to what that looked like at a day camp drop off and pick up, just so those people understand the difference maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Bailey. Sorry.
Yeah, so for the day camp aspect, you weren't dropping your kids off on Monday and then picking them up on Saturday. You were checking in and out 90 kids every single day. And so kind of like Jenna said, we were all in a blacktop parking lot for 11 hours a day. So the parents kind of had a track. They drove in and we had somebody stand at the car door. The parents did not get out. Your kid got out of the car. They got their temperature checked. And we had a really kind gentleman who actually built us hand sanitation stations. So it hooked up to the side of the building. So within 30 seconds, the kids had their temperature checks. Their hands were cleaned with soap. And then we had a floater who was walking you to your group, just because we can't have all those kids going wherever they want. And that's really what our flow was. And then in the afternoon, it was reversed. The checker outer would radio the counselor and say, hey, I'm sending the floater down. You get the kid, you put the kid in the car, and the parents drove away.
And I would say we did something very similar. That's how it worked for our day camp. And then, kind of as Jenna was talking with our overnight camp, the drive-through checkout was very popular amongst our parents. They really enjoyed being able to stay in their car, and we brought the kids to them and all their stuff to them. And another unintended, so much less lost and found, so much less that kind of rigmarole stuff. So they really did enjoy that kind of process. So
I will say on that, I got to jump in. Sorry. Our staff got so tired because they were running the kids out to the cars. And so they put in a lot of steps to make that happen. But the parents did love that. They did not, our post-camp survey did not indicate they liked only one parent at check-in. And we did not allow them to go to their cabins with them. And parents did not like that at all, but they did like the drive-through pickup.
mm-hmm.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. That was actually one thing I was going to ask a follow-up on is specifically, and I know just my experience as being a camper and a counselor in resident camp setting, pickup day is like a family reunion, and like you're there, and obviously drop off day is a tense day for some families. How did you navigate that with some of those families and make sure that they felt engaged with the camp experience when you drop off or pick up or anything like that? Does anybody have anything unique that they may have done?
Well, not sure if it's unique, but what we did do, so we had colors for zones in our cabin areas were different zones because our parents don't know what our cabin areas are called. And so each zone had a person designate, a staff member designated for that very specific thing. So they were the ones who were going, assessing how nervous a parent may look, or they were the go-to for a cabin leader who, if a parent had a question and they were like, oh, this is going to take a while type thing. And then we also had a tent at the very end. So right before they pulled out of camp, we had one final pit stop where they could, so at the beginning of the line, they dropped off their mail for the week. So we took that right away. So that was their last pit stop to use our restrooms that we had dedicated for just the parents, drop off their mail, or talk to myself or our executive director. So just putting us stationary and, giving them an opportunity to just any last minute jitters or questions that came up during the time. And we didn't get a ton of people who would stop to talk to us. A lot of things got answered in those different color zones. So we just tried to be as informative as possible, but also keep the line moving because people were waiting. If you're in overnight camp and people line up like an hour and a half before check-in, so trying to get the line through also.
And a question came through, and I think, Annalise, if you don't mind tackling this a little bit, but there was a question that came across about how do we handle the staff training or equipping them to deal with students or not students, but campers that are being dropped off wearing masks and just kind of that new setting. Like what might you have done differently as a counselor this year to kind of make sure that child felt welcome? And
how we did it during pickup and drop off was one counselor was standing up there by where we were where campers were being dropped off, and the other one was in the cabin. So I found it really important, like when you were welcoming parents, to like let them know that you would be the one with their kid all week, just that familiarity and like a face that they recognize in photos and stuff like that. So just being sure to be like, hi, I'm Annalise and I'm going to be their counselor for the rest of the week. And so just like having a conversation with them for a couple seconds. I do think there were some issues in drop off though, whenever you would have multiple kids coming at once, or you'd be like running one back to the cabin and then there was a parent waiting for you to get back. And so it was a little like stressful, like have to run to the back with all the luggage and then back and get more, just to be like there to welcome parents when they needed it. And so whenever you would like welcome someone else's camper, it was just hard. You had to be like, oh yeah, and your counselor's just running someone over, and be right back and then just wait for them to be there to be able to welcome the parents.
a question came through about transportation. I know that was a topic, and depending on your region and kind of what mandated, I guess, or what was mandated for you. Did anybody do transportation in this camp? And if so, no? Okay.
So the only thing we don't ever, as far as like busing kids into camp, we did still do our airport pickups this summer, and we did all of their health screens there at the airport. So our staff came and got them, did their health screen there at the airport. Everybody rode back in the car with masks on, and then we also, I mean, with all of our campers, but, you know, encouraging the parents to do the 14-day prior symptoms check and things like that.
Same category, but, you know, more talking about the day-to-day camps in session. Just curious as to what group management looked like to make sure that you were still safe throughout the day. Were you potting kids? If so, kind of what decision made into what areas of camp you had access to, maybe at your camp? And then what changes did you make to be in lesson planning specifically because of that? So, and really anybody can tackle that.
So I know that how we did our scheduling throughout the day was we at dinner for the next day, we would with our campers decide what activities we wanted to do. And so that was always a good time to like make sure we were doing every activity so that one camper didn't miss what they wanted to do. And so it was really important at like the beginning of the week to ask them like what was most important that you want to do this week and what are you most excited for, so you can make sure you hit that throughout the week. And I thought that like moving as a cabin activities helped a lot with just like knowing how your campers were handling certain things and like being aware of like, even if you had behavioral issues, like they weren't going off with another counselor and you weren't sure of how they were behaving then. So you were able to like better supervise them because you were with your same 8 campers the whole week and you were always at activities with them. And I think that the kids enjoyed that more because they were able to become closer with their cabin mates and they weren't like separating and going off with a group of people that they'd never met before to an activity they were unsure about. So there was less stress there because you were just always moving together.
We did similarly. They pretty much were with their group of 10 the entire week. We did have the cabin group of 10 and then a cohort of 50 or less. So typically 4 other cabins, including staff. And so that's who they would eat in the dining hall with and visit the waterfront with. If they're around another cabin, they were 6 to 10 feet away from that other cabin, but that was like their larger group of campers, but otherwise they were just with their 10 all week long.
As far as programming goes for us, we sat down with a lot of the staff at the very beginning of summer and made a spreadsheet of, okay, what games can we absolutely not do? What games can we modify? And what games are just good to go? And so off the back, we had quite a good list of, okay, we can modify these games to make it safe. Any tag game, if you get a pool noodle, it works great. They can run, they play the same, they think they're awesome because they have a green pool noodle in their hands. But it was things like that because we thought so far on the front end, we didn't have to think in the day-to-day of, oh no, okay, we're gonna get a ball out. How do they all touch the same ball without sharing germs? And so that was a really big help that we had.
Similar for us, we had our structure luckily lended itself very easily to having to adapt any of our programs. So already for us, everything in the morning time is done with their cabin. So that was really helpful because we didn't have to amend that too much. In the afternoon here at camp, camper choice is a really big deal to us. And so we have a list of activities and the kids can just go if they want to try and fit in 7 different things in that 2-hour period that they can. So that was our biggest adjustment time because we wanted to still give them that idea of choice, and it's a camper favorite here for sure. And so that is where in the afternoon we really broke everything into their cohort or their age division. So we had the Tetris map of camp activities. And so one division was assigned 4 to 5 of those drop-in activities. And then the next division was assigned a different one. And so the staff were staffed in those activities. And so the kids could still pick what they wanted to go to. And we still had some semblance of that camper choice going from activity to activity, but it was all done in their division. So they weren't showing up to the waterfront with a different group that they hadn't been with for the rest of the week. So, you know, for the most part, we were able to keep things somewhat the same.
And just going along with, I know some of the answers I've already heard, like what about equipment itself? I mean, how did equipment impact your camp? Was there more need for equipment, more purchases? Did you use less equipment because of sanitation needs? How did you manage equipment in between use, things like that? And anybody might tackle that.
So the only challenges we really had were with life jackets and like climbing and ropes equipment. Everything else we sanitized in between cabins, no problem. Life jackets, we ended up giving every camper their own life jacket, and they were numbered, so we did have to go buy a lot more life jackets, and then those got sanitized at the end of the week. And then the ropes equipment was the trickiest, as we didn't want to use any of like the bleach clean materials on those, and so we had to stagger usage between groups and wait a certain amount of time between other cohorts using that equipment.
If we couldn't clean it between use, we didn't use it. And we did our ropes by having 3 buckets. One was a dirty, one was a clean, one was a dirty, clean, and then ready to go. So there was a lot of work done with cleaning everywhere.
Yeah.
Gaga, even at the Gaga pit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We, in addition, not necessarily equipment, but we also went, so we have 3 different Gaga pits here. So we had 1 Gaga pit per age group. We had 1 9-square per age group. And so even if, you know, an age group showed up to that area when nobody else was there, they still had to use their designated age group one, you know, those things that could be used by all of the kids. And then the same for us on equipment and cleaning, either after each activity, or if it couldn't dry in time, then we just had to really stagger the use between that. And then we also had something called a electrostatic sprayer. So all of our staff just look like Ghostbusters, like walking around camp, spraying all of our stuff down, all of our picnic tables and all of that stuff. So
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I know that we like with like Gaga ball and like balls and stuff like that, we in our cabins just had like 3 balls that were for just our cabin. And so we just carried them around with us with the campers. And like one big way to always make sure you had it was to like give the ball a name and make sure that the kids like carried it around like a pet for the week. And so that was how we kind of like limited exposure at like Gaga and 9-square, was because you were the only ones touching your ball. And then in the morning when you cleaned your cabin, you would just spray it down with that.
We had a great question come through, and I'm curious to see if any of the panelists either have dealt with this or had a plan in place. But how did anyone prepare their counselors and staff to address parents who are unwilling to wear masks or follow social distancing procedures while dropping off, picking up, things like that? Did anybody deal with that this summer or last summer?
Yes.
Okay.
So similar to Jenna, we had a drive-through process, and so the parents stayed in the car the entire time. We also agreed that one could get out and unload the car, but they really were just by the car. And we had sent many communication before check-in day of what to expect for check-in, and we had trained each of our staff members to ask the driver to wear their mask at each stop that they went to, so that the parent could protect our staff and the staff could protect the parent. And so it was just constant. If they weren't wearing their mask, oh, can you please wear your mask at this station? And then the campers wore their mask until they got through all the health checks and screens. Our policies actually changed halfway through the summer. We had 3 weeks of camp where the campers didn't wear a mask and it was just all the staff. And then the very last week, everyone did. And ironically enough, we had the most resistance from parents when the restrictions got tighter. But we were prepared to interact with the parents and encourage them to keep everyone safe. And it was just constant, politely asking them to mask up at each station.
We'll move into our next category or topic is camp experience. And I think we all know that there was a lot of work that probably went into making sure that kids had a camp experience, and it was unique this year. But, with all the new safety protocols and everything, what did you do to ensure that your campers still felt camp traditions were in place and that they had the camp experience? And I'd love to hear from Annalise and on this as a counselor side of things, kind of what you might have done.
So I know that we were still able to do like some of our nighttime activities, like our campfire. And so we were all there together. We were just sitting about 10 feet apart outside. And so that was a time where like we could all be together, even though we were still apart and like limiting exposures, but we were still able to have like our same skits that we always did. They just had to be done inside your cabin groups and like songs. So I think that helped campers to feel like that they were still in the camp environment. And then we also like one of our biggest traditions is like Pathfinder Trailblazer, which are our two teams that compete against each other. And so while we weren't able to do any like big games where like we were all competing against each other at once, we did a lot of like, one was like Top Golf. And so it was like how far you can hit a golf ball. And then the score was just kept throughout the day. And then that would be like, we would still be playing against each other, but it was in your cabin groups. So it limited exposure that way and still felt like we were all one group that was like working together for a goal, even if we never saw them in person.
Madeline, would you mind tackling that too?
Yeah. So when we were discussing, it's kind of making a list of what someone was talking before about what like games they could play and what games they can play. We took made a list of what traditions were important and were what we have to do and what, as the kids were going to expect, whether it's our 5th year ceremony or torch bearers, and how we are going to, and then ones that, aren't as important and are how we can change them. And so kind of looking at each of those and how to make it new, fall within the guidelines and new and special and things like that. So I know we revamped the way that we are doing kind of those traditional ceremonies because there are things that we couldn't do, like put the kids on the bus together and stuff like that. So how can we change that to make it work and still be a special experience for those kids? And so that's what we were going for.
And I know it was discussed earlier about choice times and choice activities. And I know that was a kind of a big topic probably for last year is not allowing kids to, in pods to join other pods. And I heard, Becky, one of the ideas you had was allowing every child to horseback ride instead of worrying about bringing groups of kids and merging. How did you still in your camp make sure that kids had a voice and so that they had an option to do those things? And I know, Annalise, I heard a great answer from you is making sure at the beginning of the week, like, what are you looking forward to do the most to incorporate that? But maybe speaking to that type of level, what work went into that? How did staff make sure that kids still had a voice throughout the week and things like that?
I can answer this question. Kind of. We actually were not great at this. We knew going into it, the decision we had made that we pre-assigned all of our activities. So unfortunately, we did not have any camper choice. At the time, campers were just so happy to be at camp. They might have been like, oh, okay, but they really enjoyed just being able to be at camp. But that was one of the reoccurring comments I made of like, oh, I wish I could have been able to do this activity multiple times or chosen, they just had to sit there at a certain activity, even if they didn't really want to be there. And so we ran a small fall camp weekend and we ended up trial running a few breakout sessions in that small cohort, like Jenna had mentioned. So that is our goal. Planning for this summer is how we could incorporate more camper choice or at least cabin choice, as everything was pre-assigned out last summer. So.
Some of our teenage programs really felt the impact of having the pods. And so early on, our summer camp director spoke with the kids and we added some activities. We figured out how we could do them safely and clean in between and added them back into the schedule for the teens.
And I know that there's some questions about staff in the chat, and we're going to jump into that topic now and kind of move ahead and kind of discuss maybe some of the challenges we found in either hiring or training, handling time off, how staff, what that felt like as a staff member maybe working at camp. And I'd love for Bailey to kind of speak to your experience, if you can, on those topics, and let us know kind of on your end of things, what that was like and what it felt like. And
Yeah, absolutely. So I did not personally have the hiring. I was not out sending emails and scavenging for people. But I know that the way it was handled was really honestly in the fact that, like, okay, we don't have everybody we need right now, but these are the people that we do have. So we are going to invest into them and pour into them so that they can be great. But one of the things that really kept staff morale up, because like I said, we were in the parking lot for 11 weeks. Like, you were not going on field trips, you weren't going on water slides, you were staring at a blacktop. And that was really to make the small things fun and keep the traditions, like we kind of mentioned before, alive. So we used to have ice cream Fridays. So instead of going to the ice cream place, we got the ice cream truck brought to us. And we would do like tie-dye Tuesdays and high sock Wednesdays and crazy socks, just to make those little things get you excited about your next day.
Shelby, if you don't mind tackling that too.
Sure, I can start with the hiring process. So a big challenge we faced was international staff. We use international agencies mainly to help fill our male counselor overnight camp counselors. We did not have international campers or counselors last summer. So we didn't really do anything super differently in our hiring process. We just got very fortunate in the fact that YMCA resident camps around us decided to not open for the summer. They had all their staff already hired and they referred them to us. So then we interviewed them and hired them. So sad for them that they were not able to open, but they were able to refer their staff and continue employment with us, which was very nice. And we love them, knowing that they would return back to their home camp for the future summers. Staff time off was challenging for our staff. We know we had made the decision to not have a staff lounge on site. And so that was disappointing for them to hear. We have a staff of about 30 and we had 3 cohorts. And so we had asked them during the week not to intermingle and be closer within 6 feet of another cohorted staff member. So for their time off, whether it was on-site or off-site, we're asking them to respect the camp community that we have, the bubbles that they created to protect that space for campers and our community. For weekends, for time off, we did allow them to leave. We wanted to be realistic with our expectations and just ask them to please make good choices. If they're going to the grocery store, when they're going back with their families, being honest with us about where they were, who they interacted with, and then they knew when they returned to camp, we'd be doing the health screening process with them. Keeping staff morale up. This was also very difficult, as with each meeting, it seemed like we were sharing more negative news with them. But like Bailey said, we just had to really drive home all the great work that we were doing. We shared shout outs from parents, the impact they'd made from previous weeks, all the great things we were seeing. Something new we implemented this past summer that we never had before, I think it was a great time for us to implement it, was the campers actually wrote a letter to their counselors. So at the end of the week, they were able to get that personal letter from the campers. I never experienced that before, and the counselor said it was like their favorite thing for the end of the week. So even though they might have had a challenging week or it was a great week, but just exhausting, they were able to have that personal letter from their campers that made their day and made it all worth it in the end.
So very similar with us. And I think we, with our staff time off of during the week, we also asked them to only be hanging out with camp employees. And then and then talking to them just about, how any of their actions on time off are protecting camp and what that looks like now more on a bigger scale. And we actually had some instances where full-time staff ran into our summer staff on time off and everybody was following what they were supposed to be doing. So that was very encouraging. And so very similar to to Shelby as well, of definitely didn't have it down perfect, but really trusting that they were going to take care of camp in that way, and then do that, you know, being with only camp people for that week, and then every Sunday we were getting a new group of kids anyhow, and so that's when our exposure would start over, was that following week.
Just out of curiosity, for maybe some of the day camp perspective, what expectations did you have for staff at all that went home during the evenings? I mean, what was discussed maybe? Just business as usual? That's fine. Can we talk real quick? I know it's one of the questions that we had on here is, or at least on our sheet that we talked about is, did anybody experience staff exposures or maybe staff resignations during the summer? And if so, how did they handle that?
So I know that one of our counselors this summer did end up going home, and then about a week later ended up testing positive for COVID. So it was unsure like if she had had it at camp or if it was after she'd gone home that she had come in contact with COVID. But her co was sent home, and like all the other people she was in close contact were sent home to quarantine for the end of their 14 days, even though we were already about 8 days into being exposed to her last. And so we all went home and quarantined if we were exposed to her. And if campers were the ones to become like sick in the week, we were just sure to the rest of their cabin out of like big spaces like the dining hall where other people were, while they went to go get a rapid test and waiting to hear back from their results. So like during the time, if your camper was going to get a COVID test, it was just like you could still do activities. You just had to make sure that like no one was around at all and that everything was being thoroughly sanitized once you were done. But we didn't have a ton of exposures throughout the summer really at all.
Sometimes I think last summer didn't have we just didn't have the volume of the virus out in the communities yet. And it started to spike a little bit in July. And now we're really seeing spikes. And hopefully by next summer, things will be back to not as much of the virus out there to spread. We had one staff member that didn't feel well, and we isolated her and took her in to get a test and waited it out. And she was, she did not have COVID. But having the space to quarantine people and isolate them is very important. And you have to think about overnight camp of campers, and then who's going to supervise that camper if they need to be isolated overnight. And how do you do that safely, keeping your child protection safety rules in line and thinking about them being supervised. And every camp has different resources to make that happen, but you do need to set aside a plan and some space for quarantining.
Just this is a question on here as well, is how did your camp define exposure, and as well as what criteria did you follow to determine who else was exposed in that? And does anybody have any answers besides maybe the health agency, local health agencies or anything like that? Did you have your own internal policies and procedures?
We just knew they were exposed if their parent called and told us they were exposed. And then we took action, and that only happened in one situation, and it turned out to be a non-situation actually. I would say this deviates a little bit from your question, but have your communication plan ready in case you have exposures of staff or campers. And we kept our plan was really about that pod of children that could have potentially been exposed if somebody had been, tested positive. And so we had like cabin group letters ready to go, and let parents know if there was an exposure, and then if their child or if there was a potential exposure, and then we would communicate back if that was an exposure or not. And parents really appreciated the transparency. Nobody panicked when we did have our one situation. We had to notify one group of kids, and they were appreciative. The parents were appreciative of our transparency that there was a potential exposure, and then getting back the next day saying it's a non-issue. Your child's fine. That might have been
So-
over communicating, but they liked it.
Yeah, same for us. And I always err on the side of over communication. So we had with our state health department, as well as, just the support of our human resource department. And so for us, it was defined as, less than exposure was defined as if something happened, if somebody was positive or the potential exposure, then it was within that 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, I believe it was. It was very defined. And so we also went over that and just would notify an entire cabin group, or if it should apply an entire age group. And the same as Becky, we had the different levels of the potential exposure, actually exposed, things like that. We did have, we had a COVID-free summer. We had a staff member second to last week who got sick and went home and ended up having strep and was negative for COVID actually. But so we had already been running with that potential exposure plan until we had our test back. So, and again, just the transparency and also from the parents too. We were just hopeful and that they would communicate with us, which we did have some campers who had a fever when they went home and were tested. And for us, everything came back negative, luckily, but we did have to start running with some of those potential lists for the time being until we knew more.
Out of curiosity and just to appease me, for Bailey and Annalise, like going into this summer, how did you guys feel throughout this summer? Like as a staff member that are living with and engaged with the kids on a daily basis, like what was different this year for you, and how did you navigate that as like a staff member engaged with those kids every day?
I think as a whole, both like campers and staff, like we're all excited to be out of our houses for a while and just get to like communicate with other people that weren't our family members. So the campers as a whole, like their morale was just already up, like coming into the week, because they were excited to like see old friends or just like another kid their age in general. And so I think like that was really big about like keeping morale up with the campers. And so that experience was definitely more positive because you dealt with less homesickness, to be completely honest, because they had just been home, and so they were so excited to not be there that there wasn't as much homesickness in general. But I think that as a whole, like connecting with the campers was easier because they hadn't had connections with anyone in so long that it was easier to connect with them and like make meaningful relationships with them.
I think for us, there were kind of two sides to view it as, because one, a lot of it was stripped away. Like we weren't going on field trips, we weren't going on places. So in a way it was easier. And you also had 9 kids. You didn't have 3 counselors with 40 kids. You had 9 kids and it was you. And so the relationships that could be built were so huge because you were with them all week long and they weren't having other kids to go pull them from. But on the flip side to that, it got hard because you were essentially the only counselor in it. There weren't multiple other counselors to kind of pass the hard kids off to or to ask questions between. It was you and you alone in the bulk of being with those kids. So although it was good, it was kind of hard some days of, oh, it's all on me.
Out of curiosity, as a follow-up, did you guys have any family or anything that were concerned or that expressed concern? And if so, how did you navigate that?
My family as a whole was concerned, and so I generally, like on the weekends, I know that we at camp this summer, we went from a Saturday-Sunday week to from a Sunday-Saturday week to a Sunday-Friday week, and so we had longer weekends where we were able to like go home and socialize with our family. And my parents were more concerned about it, so I would just come home for a couple hours and like wear a mask when I was in the house, and then go back to camp and stay the night back down there, just to like limit my exposure to them and make sure that I wasn't bringing anything home to them. But I was still able to, and like we would just spend time outside more, and we just weren't like in the house watching a movie together or something like that.
I'm a unique experience or exception, but my mom's also a Y director, so she was just inside the building and I was outside, so we were getting each other sick if one of us got it.
All right. All right. Let's, I'm just jumping in real quick. We're talking a lot about exposure specifically dealing with the exposures. Like, what modifications did you make to sick areas, health offices, your camp medical individuals, things like that? Like, what did you need to do differently this year?
Our health officer did something incredible. We just built like a drive-through, come get your medicine. It was a window. So her health office was inside, and then the kids came up to the window to get their meds. So we didn't have kids coming through the building to get medication. It was genius.
I know that we did meds and they were distributed at meals. So when we were all like in our cohort of about 50 that were in the dining hall, I mean, we were spread out in our cabin groups, of course, but that was when meds were delivered. So it kept campers like out of the infirmary to make sure that we weren't coming in close contact with like our nurses and stuff. And they were masked as they gave out the meds to campers.
The same. We give out medication at meals, and then our health center is a very small space, and so we have made the decision that unless a nurse was inviting you into that space, no one was entering that area. And we have 3 rooms in there, and one has a private bathroom, and so we had designated that room as our quarantine room. So that was ready and clean, ready to go if we needed to have a camper waiting in there for whatever reason. But we had a similar process. The nurses actually came out of our medical unit and had a picnic table for the nighttime meds, and are giving meds or seeing campers throughout the day for as needed things, but nobody entered that space unless they invited them in to sit down and took care of them from there.
Just out of curiosity, what steps did any camp take to make sure that the staff was thorough with their cleaning throughout the summer and that they were following all safety protocols themselves? Was there any check and balance to that?
Yes. I think that was probably not the biggest struggle, but just the most time consuming, not only just the cleaning, but then the accountability of after the fact. We're really blessed to have our program staff, our program heads, and our cabin leaders. So for us, we're really blessed to have that set up. So, I know that I can go check in with our archery coordinator, and that she is, switching the equipment over for the next cabin, instead of having to chase down, okay, which cabin leader was here when. So that consistency helps with us. And then they did all have sheets to log when that was going on, and then checking that. And then we did temperature checks every morning and every night for all of our campers and all of our staff. And so then our leadership staff were then tasked with checking those throughout the week. And then they also had to turn them in after the week. And so just a lot of delegating that out, kind of having okay, you're in charge of this piece. And then our maintenance department just being wonderfully helpful with helping restock, give the things out, helping check on that too. And so just a lot of communication and eyes on, all of the different pieces and steps.
A simple thing that can be done to see if cleaning is happening on places that you don't see that often, like maybe inside a cabin, is just to check the chemical levels in the spray bottle that you're using. Yep. And if it doesn't go down, it's not happening. One of the things that I think I would do differently if I had that first year to do again, I would have, while everybody was in charge of helping to make sure things got cleaned properly, I would have assigned one person to be the sanitizing master and have them go out and do visual inspections of every cabin and every program space and every bathroom every day, and make that one person's responsibility. Sometimes when you share responsibility, people think that everybody else is doing it, and then it doesn't get done all the way. So to have one monitor, it'd have to be a really fun name, and somebody who likes to be a gatekeeper and check lists off things. But I think that that would have been something. I don't know about this summer because it's not going to be as, we're not fresh in the pandemic and people know the procedures better and that sort of thing.
One more question, real quick before we kind of make some closing comments from everybody is if anybody in this panel, has anybody dealt with a significantly reduced budget for supplies and equipment during this last summer? And if so, did you come up with any creative ways to either offset that or to find equipment or anything like that? Came through on the question and answer. So. Everybody's fully budgeted, fully funded.
Of course, we pulled back a lot of the program supply. We found a way to use everything we already had in terms of, arts and crafts. What do we have and what can we make out of those things? And so we, had to redirect some of that funding, obviously, for like cleaning supplies and making sure we could run camp safely. And so just doing what you got to do to make sure you have the program supplies you need to run camp, the camp that we're selling. But like, that's it. And focus on, making sure we're cleaning and we have the supplies we need and we can get it done.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a comment come through the chat that said Amazon wish lists are amazing. Did anybody do one of those from this panel?
We did. E is actually my director, but she put it on there. And whenever we were doing something, like we were playing cards one day and they were all ruined, we're like, oh, we need some waterproof cards. We would shove that on the list. And the parents and other staff members and previous counselors, they're like, oh, sure, we'll drop $50 and get you a sandbox. It was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, just to respect everybody's time, unless anyone else have something they want to add, we are going to close with one more question that I'd love for each of you to be able to answer. And it's simply, what's one thing you did this last summer that you'll do again this summer that was different? And if you have something that maybe you did that you're like, yeah, we're not going to do that, we'd love to hear that maybe too. So maybe that one thing you did that you think is awesome and you'll continue, and then obviously the reverse of that. So, and feel free, I'd love to hear from everybody if they have something. Becky, you want to kick us off?
I'd love to. I just,
All right.
The horseback riding. Am I muted?
Okay.
Okay.
Nope,
The
you're good.
horseback riding for all the campers definitely is something that we will continue. And the other thing that hasn't been mentioned is we put portable hand washing stations outside of our dining hall, so we could really see all the kids washing their hands every day. And we're going to continue that. And I just want to make it more fun this next summer, though, with like singing a song while you're washing your hands for 20 seconds rather than just kids waiting. There's got to be a more efficient way to wash your hands and a more fun way to do it. And we're going to tackle that.
And Elise, how about you? Did you see something this summer that you thought was different that you'll continue or want to continue?
I liked being more like decentralized and working in our cabin groups and just having those connections with the campers. So I think like even if like doing like a half day of being with just your campers was helpful. And then one thing that like I've heard that like we've discussed that we're not going to do again is every cabin had their own shower space. And so we've learned that having like 13 different shower spaces and having 8 kids have to shower in one shower just isn't realistic. And so just like sanitizing showers between is something that we're going to switch to next summer, as opposed to assigning a shower to every kid, like every cabin.
Shelby, you want to jump in there?
Yeah. So we had a very similar check-in process to Jenna. We did our drive-through process and we got great feedback from that. And so it was efficient. Parents got to hang out in their air-conditioned car while sitting for their check-in process. And so our only change we would hope to make with that is that maybe parents could come in and make their campers bed and get them situated before they leave. But if not, we know that that system worked. We did have a very different dining hall procedure that was safe and efficient, but it was very challenging on all of the staff. We did not do buffet. We obviously did not do family style, we had each one of each counselors had a cart of all the food, and they like were waitress style around, and so it was just very difficult for the staff and to do that process. And so we've already trial ran a few different ways that if we had all the same restrictions, we would do it differently. That was still safe and efficient, but more enjoyable for all.
Bailey, how about you?
Yeah, I think our small group sizes were one of the best things ever. Instead of being a figurehead up on the counselor board, you were in it with life with them. You were one of them, you were their friend doing life with them. So I think that is definitely one of the things that we are going to try to continue doing in whatever capacity that looks like. And with having a drive and drop off type thing for the parents, you didn't really get to build those parent connections. And so, yes, it was for our safety. We needed safety over connections this summer, but to have them stay in the car was great. And so for the future summer, I don't exactly know how that looks like, but to be able to have a face so they know, okay, this person has my kid, give them a little 20-second check-in about their kid's day, just so they know and have a relationship with you, like the relationship you have with their kids.
Jenna?
So for us, I think one of the positive things of lessons learned is that it really allowed us to try things that we had always talked about, but never really had the, bravery, desire, whatever time, whatever to actually make happen. So our drive-through check-in, doing buffets, we are busting out of our dining hall. And so we did have split meals. And before it was always, there's no way we could run split meals. How are we going to do that? Or just different things like that. Really, when it forced the hand, we found out like, oh, we really can't do these things, and it's actually more efficient. And so I think we will be keeping a lot of the things that we put into place, a lot of the adjustments, just because we did find out that it can be efficient, even COVID or no COVID. So that was kind of, an exciting moment. I think our, concern moving forward is very similar to a lot of people. We had really positive feedback about our small groups and just the bonding that was able to happen. And we did see some interesting homesickness, actually, like coming right out of quarantine, but our behavior issues were much less. And I don't know if that's reduced numbers, if it was just that gratitude of being at camp. But I think going back to a bigger group and still being able to maintain that bonding experience and, giving the staff the support they need and things like that is just something that we're really, being more intentional about with this summer.
Hi, can you hear? Oh gosh.
Yes, we can hear you still.
Okay, cool. My phone's being weird. So I'm at a brand new camp. So it'll be interesting kind of seeing how we meld those things in. But I know for me, when I ran our family camp program, and having that Zoom call beforehand with our participants was extremely helpful. And I think that that's something that, since everybody is so used to that virtual get together now, kind of continuing doing that, just that they have some FaceTime with your directors. And then I would bump up and kind of thinking about food service a little bit more while it was still safe and everybody was fed. I don't think it wasn't at the level that they were used to, and kind of readjusting and looking how to still do it safely, but give them the level and the quality of customer service that they're used to.
Well, I think that's it. We tried our best to answer all the questions we saw in the question and answer box. And so that's going to be it for this panel. I just want to say thank you to each and every one of the panelists that were here. Just a reminder that I put up the wrong screen. I apologize, but just a reminder that the panelists' contact information should be in the chat. This was recorded. By all means, share this with your colleagues and take it back to your camp. Use it how you wish. And then I'm not unable to pull it up right now, so I apologize, Matt Committee. But just a reminder to stick with us tomorrow and the rest of this week. We do have some great sessions still scheduled for you guys to be able to network and learn from the professionals out there. And we have some wonderful speakers. So we thank you for your time, panelists. We thank you for the attendees for being here and learning from these wonderful people. I know I appreciate it as a camp director. So have a wonderful week, Mac. Thank you. And
Good to
tomorrow,
see
it's being
everybody.
told out. There's the chat tomorrow at 2 o'clock or 2 Mac chats at 2 p.m. Eastern and reflections at 7 p.m. So there's I apologize. I couldn't put up the screen. Not sure what was going on. It wouldn't let me use my PowerPoint there. But thank you guys. I'm going to go ahead and close this session out and we'll go from there.